Out here in the West, the wind carries more than dust, it carries secrets. Every canyon, every broken trail has its ghosts, and every saloon hides more than whiskey and cards. Folks talk about legends, some say they're just stories told to scare children. But some legends, they're carved in blood and gunpowder. Sometimes, all it takes is a letter. Just a folded piece of paper slid across a saloon table, and a life turns. Doesn't matter if you're an outlaw with smoke on your hands, or a priest with prayer on your lips, that letter will drag you into a fight you never asked for. 'Cause out here, you don't fight for law, or gold, or glory. You fight for what you value, and if it's the only thing that keeps your heart alive, you'll burn the world before you let it go. The fire crackled low in the outlaw camp, painting restless shapes on the canvas of the night. Dust hung in the air like a veil, carrying the bitter scent of gunpowder and cheap whiskey. Among the men, always at the edge of the circle, sat Martha Canary, the woman they called Calamity Jane. She had earned that name not by chance. Trouble followed her like a shadow, and she wore it like a second skin. Her face, sharp as a blade, carried the marks of long nights and too many battles. The brim of her gambler's hat hid her eyes, but when she lifted her gaze, men looked away. There was something in that stare, not just iron, but a sorrow so deep it seemed carved into her bones. She laughed harshly at their crude jokes, spat on the ground, and outdrank most of them, yet when the camp grew quiet, the mask slipped. She would sit apart, her leather jacket creaking as she leaned against a wagon wheel, rolling a cigarette with hands that trembled only when no one watched. The flames of the fire played across her features, and in the shifting light, her eyes softened. She remembered the cry of a newborn, a tiny hand grasping her finger. That was years ago, before the blood feuds, before the endless raids, before the day her daughter was taken. The others never spoke of it, perhaps they did not know. To them, Jane was only a fellow wolf among wolves, dangerous, reckless, loyal only to the life of plunder. But inside her chest, something gnawed. Every drink she swallowed, every bullet she fired, could not silence the ache of that absence. She had buried the grief in smoke and steel, but grief has a way of clawing back to the surface. That night, the wind carried a strange sound across the prairie, like the wail of a coyote too close to camp. Jane's hand moved to the pistol at her hip out of habit. Yet it wasn't danger she sensed, but memory. She stared into the darkness, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw a child's figure at the edge of the firelight, standing barefoot in the dust. She blinked, and it was gone, just the shifting of the shadows. Haunted again, Jane, one of the outlaws sneered, lifting his tin cup of whiskey. She gave him a grin sharp enough to cut, masking the tremor in her chest. The camp soon settled into drunken snores, and Jane was left with silence. She drew a red bandana from her pocket, frayed and faded, the only thing she had kept from that time. She pressed it to her lips as though it still carried the scent of her daughter's hair. Then she tucked it back close to her heart, lit another cigarette, and whispered into the smoke. "They'll never take you from me again. Not forever." The promise was made to the night, and though no one else heard it, the prairie winds carried it away, as if the land itself remembered her vow. Dawn broke over the outlaw camp in shades of pale gold, the prairie stretching endless in every direction. The men stirred with hangovers and curses, their laughter already sharp, their guns never far from hand. Jane stood apart, hat tilted low, her cigarette glowing faint in the morning chill. She had learned to keep her distance, wolves respected wolves, but they tore apart the weak. That was when he came. A rider from the east, cloaked in dust and slyness, known in whispers as the Fox. His real name had been forgotten, maybe even by himself, but his eyes gleamed like those of a trickster who thrived on secrets. He rode into camp as if he belonged, grinning at the scowls cast his way. "Morning, boys," he drawled, sliding off his horse with the grace of a man who trusted charm more than bullets. "And ladies." His gaze lingered on Jane, and though she gave him nothing but a flat stare, he smirked as if he had read her soul. The camp welcomed him with suspicion, but outlaws had use for men who carried whispers. They fed him whiskey, demanded stories of other bands, other towns, other fortunes. The Fox never rushed. He spun his words like a gambler laying cards, one by one, until his listeners leaned in despite themselves. Jane, however, did not lean in. She kept her back to him, sharpening her knife with slow, deliberate strokes. But she listened. It was after dark when he finally came to her. She was crouched by the fire, smoke curling around her hat brim, when his shadow fell across the glow. "You hide your heart well," he said softly, his grin more like a knife now. "But I know things. Things about you." Jane's hand twitched near her holster. "Speak plain, or don't speak at all." The fox crouched low, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "A child. A little girl. Taken in the chaos of blood and dust. You thought she was lost." His eyes glittered. "But she isn't." She breathes still. For a moment the world seemed to fall silent. Jane's heart slammed against her ribs, her throat tightening until she could barely breathe. She stared at him, trying to read the lie, but there was none. Or if there was, it was buried so deep that even her hardened instincts couldn't find it. "Where?" The word scraped out of her like broken glass. The fox only smiled, teeth white against the firelight. "With men you once called brothers. The ones who share your scars, your blood debts, your crimes. They keep her as a token, as leverage. And they don't plan to let her go." Jane's fists clenched until her knuckles turned pale. Memory surged, the screams, the smoke, the moment her daughter had been ripped from her arms. She had buried that day under whiskey and rage, but now it returned with the sharpness of a knife to the gut. "You're lying," she hissed. But her voice lacked conviction. "I never lie," said the fox, his grin twisting. "Not when the truth cuts deeper." He straightened, leaving her in the fire's glow, her cigarette forgotten between her fingers. Around her the camp roared with laughter and drunken shouts, but Jane heard none of it. Only the echo of his words. Her daughter lived. The night after the fox's revelation stretched long and restless. Jane lay awake beneath the ragged canvas of her tent, the desert wind rattling through the camp. If her daughter truly lived, then every drink she'd swallowed, every bullet she'd fired, had been in vain. The guilt weighed heavier than any saddle. By dawn, she resolved on one thing: she would not show her hand. In the world of outlaws, suspicion was death. So Jane donned her armor of laughter, curses, and bravado. She rode, raided, and killed with the rest, louder and harsher than before, while inside she plotted. At night, while the others brawled and drank, she sat apart, sharpening her knife and stealing what she needed: ammunition, food, water, maps. Her whispers of rival gangs and soldiers spread like sparks, fanning paranoia through the camp. In that chaos, she became a ghost. But masks crack. One evening, a young outlaw caught the faraway look in her eyes. "You're thinking too much, Jane," he sneered. She grinned, sharp as glass. "Then drink more, boy. Spare yourself the trouble." Each night her thoughts returned to a face she could barely remember, her daughter's. She whispered the name into the wind and swore she would find her. The fox's words had cut her open, and the bleeding would not stop. But Jane was no stranger to blood. The days grew tense in the outlaw camp. Jane's whispers had taken root, and soon the men argued over every shadow on the horizon, every hoofbeat in the night. Paranoia ate at them, just as she had planned. They sharpened their knives against each other more often than against their enemies, and still the fox lingered nearby, watching her schemes unfold with fox-like amusement. Around the fire, Jane fanned the flames of suspicion with offhand remarks. Saw dust rising by the ridge, she'd mutter, and a man would leap to his feet, swearing soldiers were closing in. Heard tell the town hired bounty hunters, she'd add, and another would clutch his rifle tighter. The men drank harder, fought louder, their tempers frayed like old rope. While their fury consumed itself, Jane moved quietly. At night she slipped through the camp like smoke, gathering stolen keys, mapping the guard rotations, learning which men passed out first and which stayed sober long enough to pose a threat. Her every move was careful, calculated, but her pulse quickened with each step. The cage was closing, but so was her window of escape. The fox cornered her one night by the creek, his grin sharp in the moonlight. "You play a dangerous game, Jane," he drawled, leaning against a tree. "But games are my trade, and I know the look of someone holding a winning hand." She met his gaze without flinching. "If you know so much, you know to stay out of my way." "Or help you," he said softly. "But help comes at a price." Jane spat into the dirt. "I've paid enough prices in blood." She walked away, leaving him chuckling in the dark. The time came when rumor boiled over into chaos. One of the gangs, half mad with suspicion, claimed another had betrayed them. Guns roared, fists cracked against jaws, and the camp turned to frenzy. In the smoke and shouting, Jane slipped away. She followed a narrow trail to the old barn they used as a holding place for loot, hostages, and secrets. Its wooden walls groaned in the night wind, lanterns throwing crooked shadows across the ground. Her heart pounded as she crept closer, the red bandana tucked against her chest like a talisman. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and hay. Crates lined the walls, chains clinked softly in the draft. And there, in the farthest corner, a small figure stirred. A girl, no longer the newborn Jane remembered but still young, her eyes wide with fear. For a moment, Jane could not move. The years collapsed in on themselves, and all the blood and whiskey, all the gun smoke and pain, meant nothing. It was her daughter. Alive! The girl looked up, startled, as the door creaked. Jane stepped into the light, her voice low and rough with emotion she had long buried. "It's me," she whispered. "I've come to take you home." For a heartbeat, time stood still in the barn. Jane knelt before the girl, her hands trembling as though they belonged to someone else. She wanted to embrace her, to weep, to pour out every broken year in one flood of words. But the world outside did not stop, and neither could she. "Quiet now," Jane whispered, unfastening the chains with the stolen keys. The girl flinched at her touch, not knowing this fierce woman with a gun belt and a scar across her cheek. Jane's chest tightened, but she forced calm into her voice. "I'll explain later. We have to move." The night outside was chaos, gunfire cracked, men shouted, and the drunken brawl raged on. Jane led her daughter into the shadows, every sense sharpened. She had prepared for this moment, planting a false trail, boot prints and torn cloth that led toward the town, a lure for the bloodthirsty gang once they realized she was gone. They slipped through the brush, Jane's pistol always in hand, her eyes darting to every flicker of movement. The girl stumbled on the uneven ground, and Jane caught her with a steadying arm. She had guided horses, wagons, even drunks through worse paths, but guiding her own flesh and blood made her heart pound harder than any gunfight ever had. The prairie stretched wide and silent under the moon. Coyotes howled in the distance, masking their footsteps. Jane pushed them onward, whispering encouragement the child did not yet trust. Behind them, the storm would break, the outlaws would discover the empty barn, the missing girl, and the false trail. Then the chase would begin. By dawn, the two were far from camp, hiding among rocks near a dry creek bed. Jane pressed a canteen into the girl's hands, watching her drink as if she were a miracle. The silence between them was heavy, filled with questions Jane could not yet answer. The fox appeared at the ridge, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. Jane drew her gun, but he only tipped his hat, eyes glinting. "They'll be on your trail soon," he called softly. "Your trick won't hold them for long." Jane's jaw clenched. "Why warn me?" "Because I want to see how far you'll get," he said with a grin, before vanishing back into the hills. True to his words, before noon the thunder of hooves rolled across the plains. Dust clouds rose, the gang was coming, faster than Jane had hoped. She pulled the girl close, her voice hard but steady. "We run. No matter what happens, you keep moving when I tell you." The girl nodded, fear wide in her eyes. Jane squeezed her hand once, then spurred them onward, weaving through gullies and scrub to break the line of sight. But the gang's shouts echoed nearer, the chase relentless. As the sun burned overhead, Jane knew the truth, the false trail had bought them hours, but not safety. The men she once called brothers would not stop. The final test lay ahead, at the bridge that spanned the canyon. And Jane was ready to burn it all behind her. The canyon opened before them like a wound in the earth, its jagged cliffs burning red beneath the noon sun. A narrow wooden bridge stretched across the void, swaying with each gust of wind. Jane reined in hard, her daughter clutching tight to her waist. Behind them, the thunder of hooves was closing fast, the gang had found their true trail. Jane scanned the bridge. It was old, weather-worn, its ropes frayed but still holding. Crossing would be dangerous, yet it was their only chance. She pulled the girl down from the saddle, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me," Jane said, her voice fierce and steady despite the storm in her chest. "You keep your eyes on me. Don't look down, don't stop. Understand?" The girl nodded, pale but determined. Together they stepped onto the bridge, each plank groaning under their weight. The wind howled, rattling ropes, dust rising from the canyon depths like breath from a monster. Halfway across, Jane risked a glance back. The outlaws were at the ridge now, black shapes against the blazing sky. Their leader raised a rifle, shouting for his men to ride harder. Jane shoved her daughter forward. "Run!" They reached the far side as the first shots cracked through the air, bullets splintering wood around their feet. Jane spun, dragging a satchel from her pack, the dynamite she had stolen from the gang's stores. With quick, practiced hands, she struck a match. The flame trembled in the wind, threatening to die. The girl cried out, terrified, but Jane's eyes burned with grim resolve. "Go!" Into the rocks, she ordered, shoving her toward safety. Then she hurled the lit fuse onto the bridge. For a moment nothing happened. Then the canyon roared. The explosion tore through the planks in a deafening blast, fire and smoke twisting upward. The bridge shuddered, then collapsed into the abyss, dragging screaming riders and splintered wood into the void. Dust and flame rolled across the sky as the sound echoed for miles. Jane staggered back from the blast wave, coughing, her ears ringing. The girl clung to her, shaking but alive. Across the canyon, the outlaws cursed and raged, trapped on the far side. Their leader shook his fist, promising vengeance, but the gorge yawned too wide to cross. Jane wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her for the first time without fear of interruption. The girl's tears soaked into her worn leather jacket, and Jane pressed her cheek against the child's hair, inhaling a scent that pulled her back through years of loss. "It's over," Jane whispered, though she knew in her heart it was not. The gang would never forgive her. She had burned her last bridge, in every sense. But for now, they were safe. The canyon wind swept the smoke away, leaving only silence and the broken remains of the past. Jane lifted her daughter onto the horse once more, her jaw set. There was still one final journey ahead, into the town, and into a future she could not share. The town rose from the plains like a stubborn outpost of civilization, clapboard buildings bleached by the sun, a church steeple leaning slightly, the smell of dust and horses thick in the air. Jane approached at dusk, her daughter riding before her in the saddle. The girl had spoken little since the canyon, but her arms clung tight around Jane's waist, as if afraid to let go. People stopped to stare as they entered. Few women carried pistols at their hips, fewer still with eyes as hard as Calamity Jane's. Whispers followed them: outlaw, gunslinger, trouble. Jane ignored them all. Her gaze swept the street, not for enemies this time but for safety. She needed someone she could trust. She found it in the form of Reverend Cooper, an aging man with kind eyes, who stood outside the church sweeping dust from the steps. He froze when he recognized her, memories flickering across his face. But instead of fear, he lowered his broom and gave a slow nod. Inside the dim chapel, Jane sat her daughter on a bench and knelt before her. The child's hands fidgeted in her lap, uncertain and frightened. Jane brushed a lock of hair from her face with a tenderness she hadn't known she still possessed. "I can't stay," Jane said softly. Her voice was rough, worn by years of smoke and whiskey, but the words shook with truth. "My life, it's full of blood and ghosts. If I keep you with me, they'll come again. And they won't stop until you're gone." The girl's eyes filled with tears. But you found me. Jane swallowed hard, the weight of that truth nearly breaking her. And now I'm giving you back what I couldn't before. A chance to live. To grow. To be more than my shadow. She pressed the red bandana into her daughter's hands, the same she had carried all these years. Keep this. It's proof that no matter where I am, I'm still yours. The chapel was silent but for the creak of the wooden beams. Jane rose, every muscle in her body screaming to stay, to fight, to protect. Yet she knew the law would never let Calamity Jane raise a child, nor would the gang rest until her blood was spilled. To give her daughter a future, she had to vanish from it. She turned to Reverend Cooper. She's yours now. Guard her better than I ever could. The old man bowed his head, solemn. You have my word. Jane lingered one last moment, her shadow falling long across the chapel floor. Her daughter reached for her, but Jane stepped back, forcing a crooked smile. Be strong, little one. Stronger than me. Then she was gone, boots striking hard against the wooden floor, the door slamming open to the night. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright over the prairie. Jane pulled her hat low, mounted her horse, and rode into the darkness without looking back. Each hoofbeat carried her farther from the child she had saved, and deeper into the endless road of her own exile. Years rolled by like tumbleweeds across the prairie. The old battles faded into dust, and the name Calamity Jane became less a person than a legend whispered in saloons and around campfires. Some swore she had died in a gunfight. Others claimed she wandered into the mountains and never returned. But the truth was simpler, she vanished, leaving behind only echoes. Her daughter grew among the townsfolk, raised not by blood but by kindness. Reverend Cooper kept his promise, shielding her from the shadows that had once hunted her mother. The girl learned to read, to sew, to ride a horse not for flight but for freedom. Yet even in her new life, a piece of her past remained, folded carefully in a drawer, a faded red bandana, frayed at the edges, marked by her mother's hand. As the years passed, she became a woman. Her features softened by youth now carried the same sharp lines as the mother she barely remembered. And though the town offered her a place, her heart tugged toward the horizon, to the wild country where her story had begun. One summer evening, when the sky blazed with the colors of dying sun, she rode out alone. The trail led her back to the canyon where the bridge had once stood. Time had not healed the wound in the earth, it still yawned wide, cliffs rising jagged on either side. But the wreckage of the old bridge was gone, swallowed by the years. She dismounted, walking to the edge. The wind rose, carrying with it the scents of dust and sage, the same winds that had once carried the vow of a mother desperate to protect her child. The woman drew the bandana from her pocket, its fabric worn thin, and held it against her chest. I don't know where you are, she whispered, voice trembling but strong. But I remember. I'll always remember. With careful hands, she tied the bandana to a lone cedar branch that clung to the cliff's edge. The cloth fluttered in the evening wind, a scarlet flame against the dying light, a marker for anyone who might pass, proof that Calamity Jane's bloodline endured. She lingered there, eyes closed, feeling the land breathe around her. For the first time, she did not feel like the lost child of an outlaw. She felt like a bridge herself, between past and future, between shadow and hope. As night settled over the canyon, stars pricking the sky, she mounted her horse once more. She did not look back. The bandana danced in the wind behind her, catching the starlight like fire, a symbol of a love fierce enough to survive both time and ruin. The legend of Calamity Jane lived on, not in the gun smoke of outlaws or the whiskey-stained tales of saloons, but in the heart of the daughter who remembered.